Now we're going to run through a couple of practical examples. So beyond just loading up some of these programs on a drum loop, we can now maybe get a little bit more detailed and think about what we would do to actual signals on their own. And really, what's going to help you the most here is to load up a session and just get a variety of different sounds, a guitar sound, a synth sound, a pad, a voice, drums. And you're just going to want to go in and experiment with the different programs, because if you do start to get into Nebula and use it quite frequently, you'll want to know what's going to sound good on what parts, or at least to associate how each of those programs is coloring the sound. I assume you all know how to use EQ by now, and if you don't, what I would recommend is you go back and rewatch the specialty EQ video, because that is really how you're going to be applying it from now on. Because really with Nebula, what makes it so special most of the time is that all you have is just one band. So if we go in here and we grab the vintage EQ, you can see we only have control over this one particular band. And that means it's very much special. I mean, you could try to use multiple versions and get more bands, but it's not really necessary considering all the things that we've talked about thus far. So in this video, we're going to go through a vocal example, and then the next video, we're going to look at and talk about working with a drum group. So these decisions are really going to be completely subjective. What I think is going to benefit this the most, you might have a completely different opinion, and that's totally fine. That's really where the joy and beauty of mixing music comes into play. It's you making your own decisions. So this is the vocal part we have.
Won't you hear my call?
It's probably helpful to put this into raw mode. And I'm just going to consolidate that. Make sure that we're getting the full part.
Won't you hear my call?
Cool. And now we all know the first step that we have to take is to bring on our level meter and just make sure that we're going to be going in at the ideal level.
Won't you hear my call?
All right, so this is way too loud right now. Maybe I'll take out a couple more dB.
Won't you hear my call?
But we're still having an issue, and in my opinion, it's an issue we can very easily resolve. So we're planning to use Nebula really as the color and the character device. So what I want is a compressor that's extremely clean to just level this out a little bit, specifically on that last really loud call word. So I'm going to use just one that's built into this program. Again, you can use the freeware if you want, and let's just see if we can clean this up a bit.
Won't you hear my call? Won't you hear my call? Won't you hear my call? Won't you hear my call?
Okay, that sounds pretty good.
Won't you hear my call?
And we can just check to make sure that it has had an impact. This is what it looks like before.
Won't you hear my call?
And here's what it's going to look like after.
Won't you hear my call? Won't you hear my call?
So maybe now we could even consider adding a little bit of gain back in, just to get a little bit closer to that 0 mark.
Won't you hear my call?
Yeah, I'm happy with that. That's going to be where I want it to be. And if for some reason Nebula does something with this extra peak, I'm hoping that it's going to be more of a smoothing characteristic than it would be, say, something really drastic. All right, so we're good to go here. We can bring in Nebula, and let's think about what should happen here first. So what I said before in the earlier video where there was the presentation was that with modern music now, a lot of times everything that's recorded is recorded as cleanly as possible, because the coloration and the effect processing is going to happen in the computer. So the preamps that are used now traditionally are very, very clean. They're really picking up the microphone. Now the microphone, and you'll even see and hear that you have the option to go in here and choose a microphone, for example.
Won't you hear my call?
That sounds terrible, but what you're trying to do is you're trying to pair a microphone with a singer and get the very best result possible. But sometimes it needs a little bit more, and that's where the preamp comes into play. In the past, you'd have just as many preamps as you'd have microphones, microphones, and you would try to pair and match what's going to sound best. So you first try to find the right microphone for the singer, and then you try to find the right preamp that's going to complement that microphone. And then from the preamp, you're going to go into the actual console, which has another form of amplification, which colors the sound even further. And again, these are all very subtle changes, but that's kind of the point of Nebula. So let's imagine, for example, that the recording we got was incredibly clean, okay? It's gone through more of the modern process. It was recorded with the microphone they thought was best through a very clean preamp, and now we want to add a little bit of color back in. So we're going to choose a preamp that we think is going to work well, and I have a pretty good idea for this sound. I'm going to go with the Roho 8 here. And we can listen to it.
Won't you hear my call? Won't you hear my call?
And so if you don't hear a difference right now, that's totally fine. We're going to bounce this out. And then what I want to do is go back to this original, get rid of that Nebula, okay? Leave the compressor. This version is with the preamp and with the compressor, since that's what we've bounced. So with preamp here. And we're going to name this without preamp. And change the color on that. And now we can listen to these two back to back. Let's just check and see where we're peaking out on both of these, just so that we know.
Won't you hear my call?
My 7.5.
Won't you hear my call?
Minus 8.2, so we can stand to lose 1 dB on this version here. So we've taken out 1. We should now be pretty even. We can listen to these two guys back to back and figure out if we can hear a difference.
Won't you hear my call?
So that's without.
Won't you hear my call?
And that's with.
Won't you hear my call? Won't you hear my call?
So what you really want to listen for here is what's happening when we have the my and the call. So what was going on before was that as she's getting louder, it's getting much brighter. You can really kind of hear that. And part of that has to do with this being a very, very clean dynamics processor. So by bringing in that instance of Nebula and running it through the preamp, we're getting that little bit of extra color, and it's also smoothing the frequency range out when she's getting louder, which is exactly what I want to have happen here. So very subtle, but it's getting the effect that I want it to have. It's not completely changing the tone or quality of her voice, but it's doing that little bit, which is helping lock it in, make it sound just that little bit better. All right, so let's do one more comparison.
Won't you hear my call? Won't you hear my call?
So really listen to that call.
Won't you hear my call?
Cool, so I'll just get rid of this without preamp version for now, and we'll check this out in our meter once again just to make sure we're still where we want to be.
Won't you hear my call? Won't you hear my call?
Yep, that looks good to me. I'm happy with it. And what I think I'm going to do next is apply some kind of EQ to this. Okay, so let's go back and let's grab Nebula. And you can totally experiment here on your own, but I think what I'm going to do is I'm going to add this high mastering bell EQ. So this should be very clean. It should be able to get a little more clarity out of her voice. And we'll try it and see.
Won't you hear my call? Won't you hear my call? Won't you hear my call? Won't you hear my call?
Let's add a lot so we can
Won't
really
you
hear it.
hear my call? Won't you hear my call? Won't you hear my call?
Couple dB here.
Won't you hear my call? Won't you hear my call? Won't you hear my call?
So this has definitely increased the gain. Let's check it out and just see. Here it is before.
Won't you hear my call?
Here it is after.
Won't you hear my call?
It really hasn't done it that
Won't
much.
you hear my call?
Wow, I'm surprised.
Won't you hear my call?
pleasantly surprised, actually. So we're going to keep that. I like the way it sounds. So what I'm going to do is I'm just going to grab a tool device and turn it down just by about 1 dB or so. And what I think I'm going to do next is run into another instance of Nebula, and let's apply a little bit of reverb to this sound. So my guess is it's going to sound very good through the room. And if this was a little bit sparser of a composition, it would probably sound pretty good through that hall that we have. So let's try both versions.
Won't you hear my call? 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 Won't you hear my call?
So for more of a pop song, this would definitely be a great option to go with. If this was a little bit more sparse, and because she's also singing like "Won't You Hear My Call," you're expecting it to be a little bit of a denser, longer reverb, like she's far away calling out to you. As corny as that sounds, sometimes that is the reasoning for why you choose a particular type of processor or the instrumentation in a song. So we'll now go and use the hall setting.
Won't you hear my call? 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 Won't you hear my call?
So something like that.
Won't you hear my call? Won't you hear my call? Won't you hear my call?
So for me personally, I think I prefer that small room setting. We'll just go and grab that, bring it back in.
Won't you hear my call? 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 Won't you hear my call?
And again, we can check our level meter at the end, see if we need to turn things down a little bit.
Won't you hear my call? Won't you hear my call?
Probably not. That sounds pretty good. We could bounce it, and we'll do that here. And then the last stage is going to just be listening to the original and listening to what we have processed. So here is our processed version.
Won't you hear my call?
And then we can go back and grab the original, which is going to be quite a bit louder, but that's fine. Sometimes you got to go through a bunch of steps. All right, there we go. So we just need to level match these. This is going to be quite a bit louder right now, so let's just check it out. This was peaking out at about -6, so I should be able to turn this down by 6. It should be very close.
Won't you hear my call?
Yeah, it's close enough.
Won't you hear my call? Won't you hear my call? Won't you hear my call?
So that's the processed.
Won't you hear my call?
Then here's the original.
Won't you hear my call? Won't you hear my call? Won't you hear my call?
Getting a little bit cut off at the beginning.
Won't you hear my call? Won't you hear my call? Won't you hear my call?
The original.
Won't you hear my call?
And then the processed.
Won't you hear my call?
So again, this is very subtle, but that's what Nebula is. It's very subtle, and if you're not hearing a reason to apply this processing, by all means, you don't have to do it. It's not going to make or break your record, but for people who are a little more OCD and have golden ears and love the little details and the little perfections, you can definitely do a lot. So in the next video, we're going to talk about another application of preamps, and it's going to involve our drums group, so stick around for that.